Welcome to the New Zealand Society of Genealogists online writing and publishing group. Today we welcome Janice Page from Printabook to talk about self-publishing.
I think the thing with publishing your book is that from my perspective, what I can tell is you guys know a lot about your writing and your research. And from my perspective, I see that as the hard part. And from your perspective, it's possible that you see the hard part being publishing because it just seems daunting and there might be a lot of things that you don't have any idea where to start. And a lot of people just come in and we have a meeting with Joe or myself and just go through. So if you ever want to publish something and you're feeling serious about it, it is worth just going into somebody like us and it can all be done from everywhere. So of course there's that wonderful opportunity is you can just do it from anywhere. So we've got people coming to us from all over New Zealand, and everything is done online. So and then books are delivered once they're finished. So I've put just a little bit of a brief presentation together just to kind of give some brief facts. So what one is self-publish, where to begin? First, I mean, one of the big things to consider is how many copies do you want to print? You either go for a small print run, which is very common. People have done as little as one book. And it can go up to 100 books, often for family or friends. And then the other option is obviously a medium to large run, which we do a lot of that as well, which is when you plan to sell your book. And that could be anywhere from 500 to 2,000 or 3,000, even higher numbers sometimes. In the New Zealand market, the numbers probably don't go much more than 5,000 really. And then just to the side there's obviously, and possibly for people that have published before, we walk you through the steps of applying for an ISBN, which is something that you need if you want to put your book in the library. And we'll do barcodes and things for the covers. I have given some information to the web link to the National Library's website, and that also is a good resource to go and find out information about publishing. Then step 2 would probably be, deciding what size and the binding type that you want your book to, and how you want it to look. And I always say, it's worth looking at. And we have, I mean, if at Caxton at Printabook, we have just samples just everywhere. And so it is a good opportunity for people to come in and sit down and just go through the samples and see what options there are. There are really the basic 4 options. If you do a lot of that, first one is stapled books. It's generally children's books. It's anything less than 40 pages. Then you've got the soft cover with a spine, which generally is the most popular, most economical. Above that, you've got cased or hardcover, which is a really lovely option. A lot of people tend to print maybe 50 copies of a soft cover and maybe do two or three or up to 5 as a keepsake, as a hardcover, which is also an option. You can divide it like that. And then, of course, there's the wire and spiral bound, which is really not really probably something that you would look at. It's more something for potentially a lot of cookbooks and things get done in that format. Then the next thing is to consider what is your timeline. Generally, everything is there's so many variables to doing a book. To apply for an ISBN, if you plan to do that, it only takes a couple of days, and you do have to do it closer to when you publish, because otherwise the National Library will keep bothering you to ask you where their copies are. The layout, if you're wanting somebody to do the layout for you, like a professional company to do something like that we offer to do, may take 2 to 4 weeks. It does depend on the complexity, obviously, depending on how much is involved in the book. If you need scanning done, there's that. Or if you need some photoshopping done on your images, those sorts of things to consider. And then the final part is printing and binding. potentially takes around 2 to 4 weeks as well. And it all depends on, the busy time of year, or the size and the quantity that you're getting of your book. I have written there, just to have a look at other books. You get great ideas of what, generally what fonts you like. It's always important to have a think of those things, and maybe more on the creative side of actually putting the professional part of your book together. Then it's, will I do the layout or get my book designed? And that, if you're doing the layout, it is always good to go and have a look at other books, because then you can get a feel for how you want it to look. We generally, from our perspective, we charge an hourly rate, and what we would do to give you an idea of what costs, because it is a very difficult thing to estimate. We often just will ask you for your word count of your manuscript, and by getting that, we can, if we know what size book you're going for and what your word count is, we can normally estimate how many pages your book will be. And that's will you require photos to be scanned, how many images you plan to have in your book, and what size book. And those are the 4 things really, as a basic idea, to get an estimate. And then you can get a ballpark, especially in the beginning of a project, to know how far you want to go. As a designer, I shouldn't say, but you can save costs by putting the manuscript together yourself. So, of course, I love that part of the job. I love doing the designs and putting the layout together, but it certainly is a cost saving from your perspective. It's a definitely cost saving. But what a lot of people do choose to do is they'll put the book together and then get us to do maybe a cover design, depending on your skill level. Sometimes you can get and that's much quicker and cheaper to just get us to do the cover for you. So and then I've just kind of put in a little bit of a guide to the process and how the steps. The writing the manuscript is your part, which is the difficult part from my perspective. The research and all that sort of thing seems daunting to me, but and then I think from what I've heard so far, your editing and proofreading is obviously something that you know a lot about, and you get that done. We do have a lot of people that don't get their books proofread. They they might not know a lot about that, and they don't get it edited. And it does become, once we've started doing layout, or once the book is very far down the track and it doesn't get proofread or edited, it can end up being, a little bit of a nightmare. And it's amazing how many people come back and say, I read it 100 times and I never saw anything. So it is important to get an external person to have a look at your work, because you just don't see it. And then during that editing and proofreading stage is a good time to probably go and get quotes while you have a little bit of time. And from our perspective, there's 3 ways of doing that. On the left there we have, we can give you pricing including design of the entire book. Or in the middle there we have, if we're not doing any design and you supplying a final print ready PDF. And we generally, because it is quite critical on the cover of a book to be done, it's quite a technical thing. We would often just put we charge a small fee to kind of get the cover to where it needs to be if you're doing the design. Otherwise, you supply the text and we will design a cover for you. So, I mean, the best way of especially if we're doing any layouts or anything like that, it is good to meet with you or do a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting and just have a chat about what you're wanting it to look like. I have bolded there, if you have a sample that you love, bring it with you or show us an idea of what you like. It's always a good idea because everybody's opinion is different on things if there's a specific way you want it to look. We always ask for, and I'm not really sure what everybody uses. I would assume Word. That's what 95% of manuscripts come in Word. we like the Word file separate and then the images as a separate folder of images. So we don't, it often makes it very difficult to work with, especially if we're doing the design, to work with it if it has got the pictures within the manuscript. It's just very time consuming, and it depends on how well they've been put in there, but we have to actually remove them because occasionally Word has a tendency, and this might be something that you guys know how to manage, is it has in the past, we've received manuscripts where the Word has actually compressed the images, and it's possible that it has lowered the resolution. And so once that happens, I think it's very difficult to get it back. So ensure your images are well named, and so that and that we would know exactly where your images fall within the text. And remember to supply captions, which most people would do. So that's if we are doing the design. Then, and what we would do is we would generally we would do a first chapter for you, and we would send you a PDF and a visual to see what you think. It's very important that what we decide is we give you a design and get you to check and see that you like the way it looks. Once you've had a look and made some minor changes and you get the feel that you want, we would lay out the balance of the book. There would be a set of proofing back and forth, either by PDF or by print. We'd print copies out if you wanted to do it that way. And once you're almost 100% sure that there is nothing else, we do, most of the time with Printabook, we do offer a printed bound copy of the final manuscript. So it literally is exactly what you're going to get, one copy of it, just so that it is a different way of looking at it, and suddenly you might see things that you hadn't seen before. And we would do that even if there was no design required. If we get a file in from you, we would set up the cover, send proofs, or get check and make sure we've got everything correct. And we would still send potentially a digital proof just to get you to double check the way the cover has been set up. And also, again, once it's approved, we would send you a printed bound copy. It does depend on timing, obviously. If everything's in a real rush, there might not be time to do that, but it is a really good way. It's such a personal thing, and so it kind of gives you a feeling of relief when you see exactly what it's going to look like. And then the cover design, if we do the cover design, we would send you a copy of a few different versions, often of the time, depending on what level of creativity you want. And you could choose your cover, and we have a lot of success with covers. We tend to have a lot of people that we've been doing it for a while. So that's the general basic timeline. And then a few short weeks later, after everything's been approved, you'll get your professional publication handed to you. And there's just it's amazing how wonderful it is. I've met so many people that have written manuscripts that have taken years, and a lot of them take a long time. And that day that they get it in their hands it's quite magical, really. Okay. I'll carry on. So generally, what information do we need to give you a price estimate? This will include, so it's really for us to give you a price estimate, we would find out if you want us to do any design, all those sorts of questions. We'd ask you a word count or approximate page count, the size of the book, how many copies you want. Now, of course, that we do a lot of digital printing, and if you're asking for a smaller quantity of books, you can actually choose that you only want 55 pages in color and 200 pages in black and white. So it is, in the past it was a bit more difficult when we weren't doing a lot of digital printing, but now it's quite a flexible thing. So you can have your pictures, and you used to in the past have to have a block of color. You'd maybe have to have a book with just the middle part being color and the outsides being black and white, and so it's quite nice now. You don't have to worry about that at all. But it is obviously cheaper, if you have only black and white pages, and we account for those, it will bring your price down. And then the decision if you're going to supply a finished ready to print file or if we're going to do the design for you. We can also suggest papers, or you could let us know your preference. A lot of books, depending on if you have a lot of photographs, you would choose to have a coded paper. If you had a lot of text, you would choose an uncoded paper. A lot of people don't choose gloss. It would be matte or uncoded as a general guide. I've got the sort of the grammages of text and covers that we use. And then of course we generally like to laminate all covers, and it depends also again if you want a rustic sort of feel, you might not want it laminated. It does give it a certain amount of protection though, so it is worth it, lasts a little longer. On the side there as well, I have actually, that's sort of a guide, and I'm not really sure if you find it useful. You may find it useful is just to give you an indication of more or less how many words you can fit on those size pages. It might be able to give you a little bit of an indication. It's a broad calculation. So if you've got if your manuscript is A4, you'll potentially fit about 660 words on that page. That's just a standard kind of layout format, but it does help in deciding how thick your book will be. Okay, cover design and setup. That's just to give you an indication, just a little bit about you know, what we generally ask for covers. A lot of people aren't sure if they should put something on the back, if they have a blank back page and that sort of thing. So, but that's a basic one, the title, the spine. Once we know we have calculators that we use, once we know how many pages and what paper you're using, we can calculate a spine width, and we can give that to you. It's always a good idea to have a summary on the back. But that's a very basic idea of what we would do for a cover. And then the text pages, it's choosing your page size. We don't have all the page sizes. On the right there, I have put a few page sizes. More and more commonly, we are getting a size that people tend to really like, which is between A4 and A5. Because A5 does tend to be a little bit small, especially if you have photographs. But whereas A4 does tend to be a bit cumbersome, and it looks more like a manual or a catalog of some description. And you've got that many. I have a few books here which are sort of that slightly bigger than A4, and they do actually look really good at that size. And then generally, just generally setting up your text to have at least a nice margin around the outside of your book, and give it a lot of white space. It makes it a lot easier to read and a lot more enjoyable to read. So I tend to give quite a big margin. And I find leading to be quite important. If you have that really tight leading, it makes it harder to read. We found, you know, it just is not as easy on the eye. Then here is a few things that you need to decide as well, especially in the introductory pages of your manuscripts. A lot of people haven't really considered that. And we always tend to advise to put a title page and a little bit of a sort of a few pages to lead you into the story. A copyright page is always good to have, even if you have a little bit of, even if you don't have an ISBN and all that sort of thing, it's helpful to have that. Do you want to have acknowledgements or a forward, contents or an index? And then something about the author is always really nice. I find a lot of people want to know a little bit about the person that's written the book, and that's often more and more, it's either on the back cover or it's in on the last couple of pages of the book. Page numbering, running heads and footers is something to consider if you want to have that on there. And then I've added a family tree at the end there, and you guys might know more about family trees than me, I'm sure. And I believe that there is a lot of people have told me that there is a lot of resources in getting family trees drawn up, and you can get apps and that sort of thing, which I know very little. We actually draw family trees ourselves, and I do have one here further down. I'll just show it to you here. And these are very time consuming. So if there's anybody that knows a good place to go for family trees, because we could probably, that's unreal the time it takes, and that must be on a lot of your, a lot of your books. Okay. And then I've just written at the end there, a short blurb on the back cover is always a good idea. A nice little summary always just gives it, I always find if I'm reading a book, I turn it over and just see what it's about. So it's always just a little bit of information. On this next page, I have just put a little bit of an idea of what I was talking about. So a title page is really just, you get a half title or a title. It's just really a duplication of the cover to lead you in. That second page is really a copyright page. We do have a lot of the blurb already set up, and so you can adjust that to whatever you have. I mean, if you're not selling these books and you're just sending them to family and friends, you could just write a little acknowledgement on that page, or you can skip that page altogether. There is no rules. And then contents pages, and how you want to separate it. If you want your, and this is something that I find often is also something you need to organize depending on the complexity of your book, if you want to have it in parts or in just in chapters. But that's something that you would probably have quite a lot of ideas about already. Then I've just put a page together here. This is just a few ideas of the sorts of books that we've done in the past. A few of these we have designed the covers, and a few of them have been supplied already. So there's a lot of people out there that can, do a beautiful design. And all we have to do is kind of fix up the final bits and pieces to make sure that it's print ready. So we've done, and there's a mixture of hardcover and softcover over there. And children's books is another thing. We do a lot of children's books. And that's really it. It is worth saying we do have a copy of this guide, which I have here, this Printabook self-publishing guide. We created it many years ago, and I think we are on the 12th edition. So we are adding to it all the time, and coming up with new ideas and things to make things easier. And this has really got it's got paper samples in it. It's got copyright information. It's got how to apply for ISBNs. It gives a lot of ideas and tips on layout as well. So if anybody does want me to send a copy of that, I can send them around because they are very handy. And that's Printabook. Yeah.
I just thank you so much. I mean, there's just such a lot in there to think about, but I have to say that the way you've presented it has made it all seem very doable and approachable, and I think that's the exciting thing. So now I have got one question already in our chat. People, if you are wanting to ask questions, do just either raise your hand or put your question in the chat. Either way is absolutely fine. And feel free to start turning your cameras on if you'd like, but leave your microphones off until your question time. And I'll say your name before you ask a question so that we're not all trying to talk all over each other. I think that, Janice, you could probably stop sharing your screen now, and then you'll be able to see the people who are asking you questions, which I think would be really nice. Right, Yvonne, if you'd like to turn your microphone off, would you like to be the first to ask a question?
Well, that was the first question was mine. What do you mean by leading or tight leading?
Oh, tight leading. Okay, that is the best way to describe it is, for example, the space from one line to the next.
Oh,
So
right.
kind of, yeah, it's that, spacing between lines is
Yeah,
leading.
I've never heard
Yeah.
the term before. So,
Oh, okay.
so thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries.
No, that's great. Good technical question there. Rodney, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, you have reference there to an expression that I've heard, Janice, before. I've had to do with printing 2 books, one for basketball, one for genealogy. And before I ask my question, might I say, well done to you. I think this has been a fabulous presentation, which fortunately covered or showed that I covered most of this with help from a printer here in Johnsonville. But you've done a fabulous job and reinforced what has been a bit known to me. The word bleed, though, on the page where you've got the book Hunter's Gold cover design and setup, there's talk about bleed. And that puzzled
Yes.
me. What the heck was bleeding and where is it? What's the effect of it?
I know, and it is. Even designers in the design industry don't know what bleed is, and essentially what it is, and it probably, oh no, it will affect a lot of your pages. So if you're having anything that goes off the edge of the trim area, so at the edge of your book, like for example, this book, everything prints to the very edge. When you guillotine that on a guillotine and you've got a whole stack of books, it's very difficult for you to cut exactly on the edge. So the important thing with bleed when you're producing something like this is you've got to have at least 3 mils extra printed matter on the outside to make sure that you don't get a white line. And that's what bleed is. And so even on your pages, for example, I mean, it wouldn't affect your general pages because you don't bleed and there's a great big white margin. But if you're printing anything, and I'll just look, so this is the children's book we did. And so each one of these pages goes to the very edge. And you can't really have your image ending right on the edge because if the guillotine cuts it slightly off, you'll have a white line. And so essentially with everything that we do, you need to have 3 mils. And interestingly enough, the worst part is if you're doing a hardcover book, which I do have a sample of a hardcover, for example. If you're aware of a hardcover, you have an end paper. And so the end paper is what sticks to the inside hardcover. And that so your actual cover has to bleed all the way around. So actually on a hard cover, because it actually wraps around the book, we need 17 mils bleed, which is very difficult when you have a photograph with nothing there. So we have to be quite creative with bleed on a hard cover because you need to actually go around the edges of something quite thick. So yes, it is. I think a lot of people battle with bleed.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, great illustration of it with those examples there too. John, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. I was just wondering how you match images that you've got in a folder. So you mentioned earlier in your presentation about keeping your images and illustrations, etc., separate. How do you then indicate in the manuscript where each photo or illustration is supposed to go?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, actually. There's a few different ways to do it. What a lot of people do is they put the caption, or they'll number it. So they'll say, they'll put number 1 and then the caption next to that, and that will be within the text. So you'll have like your text will be going, and then suddenly you will have your caption, like an image, some reference to an image. It'll be number 1 and you'll put the caption of your photograph. And when we see that, we see immediately that it's a photograph, and we'll go to, and it depends on how well I mean, it is the easiest way is to number your photographs. It is by far the quickest is, so you'll say, and you'll number your pictures 1 to 100. and when within your manuscript you'll have number 1 and you'll have the caption, and we'll remove that number 1, but at least then we know that that's image number 1 from the folder. We'll insert there and use that caption, so we know more or less exactly where you want it, but it doesn't get imported into the document or downsized or anything like that.
Great, thank you.
How do you then, because that was a question I had too, John, so I was pleased to hear you ask that. How do you then account for how much space that's going to take up and how many pages your document might be and all of those kinds of things?
It is a bit tricky, and it's not a science. There is no scientific way, but what we do find is you get a feel for, if you're doing something like this size book, which is the slightly bigger than SRA 5, you generally know that a lot of the images might be like half a page. So you're generally estimating. So if somebody came to me and said that that one doesn't have many pictures in it, let me go and look for something with a lot of pictures in it. So you kind of generally know that potentially a lot of the pictures might take up a half a page. So when we estimate, we'll say, 2 pictures per page. And so if you have, 100 pictures, we give a guess at saying, well, that'll probably be about 50 pages worth of copy. Occasionally you're going to have a much bigger one or a much smaller one, but it is just averaging. So it's the, how long is a piece of string when you get the first, when you have to estimate on these things, you are really guessing, although we've got quite good at it. And I think that general estimation, because sometimes you'll get smaller pictures, sometimes you'll get bigger, but you're estimating that 100 within this sort of layout, 100 photographs will be 50 images, 50 pages, sorry.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Janice. It makes a lot of sense. Rodney, you've got another question.
Well, yes, that's not a question. I wondered if it would help, and I'm interested in Janice's thoughts on this. I think, Megan, you might know where I'm going to come from. Our second meeting of this group, I see very few faces I remember from there, but we had that wonderful professor of whatever from Hamilton who did a great talk to us about how to insert pictures into text and all, and he had what I told him on the second session, I think, that he had a very complicated way but absolutely brilliant what Word can do for you, because most of us use around about 10% of the ability of Word, and he took us through to the other 90% and almost lost most of us that night. There are setups and putting things in there, and I threw a curved ball to him, because when I did the Kilburney genealogy history, and I'll use a part of the book as an example, the second half of the book was a paragraph, some long, some short paragraphs about a lot of our past members, around about 50 of them, and a head and shoulders photo of each of those people. And me and my naivety at the time set it up using a Word table and put the table in, put the picture in. You might, for example, have a row with 2 columns, the picture on one piece, the text in the other piece, and it kept the 2 together. And when you PDF it, but before you PDF it, just take the borders off the table, and all the pictures stayed right where they should have been. And to me, it was so flipping simple. Janice, am I losing you, or you see what I'm getting at? Because
I absolutely do. And I think it's wonderful that you actually are and you've learned new things in Word. I think the danger is we do receive a lot of things where people don't really know Word, but they've inserted a lot of, and I'm not good at Word. I'll be very honest. I don't know Word very much at all. So what we generally do is we import text straight into a design software. So we don't actually work in Word. But what I find very difficult to understand is anchors. And I have received a manuscript with a lot of anchored text, and if we import it into something different or change the font or change the size and the leading, all the anchors just move all over the place. And so I don't know much about anchors, but this table thing might be something that really works well. And it's just a matter of knowing these things. And unfortunately, if you don't know them, you end up putting all these pictures, and then the pictures don't stay with the text if you change anything. And so it really all depends on your knowledge.
So with these tables in text, I mean, the tables in this case were absolutely dead simple. I would quite simply put in one row, but it's from the table format. One row with 2 columns, make a small column and a larger column, put the picture in the small bit, and I was alternating them. I would have this person's photo on the left, the next person on the right, so it staggered its way down the page. And sometimes a person might have 3/4 of a page. The top little bit was the table with the photo, and the table was only the size of the photo with some words overflowed into writing normal text till I get to the next person, and then just do another little wee table with the photo and get started on their text and overflow it into nothing moved. You put it into, you take the borders and shading, take the borders off them all, call it a PDF, send it to the printer, and you're hunky-dory.
Well, it does sound good.
I was just about to talk to that, Rodney, because I think a lot would depend on how it is you're sending it to the printer. So I remember Janice had the 3 columns, one where you get some input and design from them, one where you send a completed PDF and look at cover design, and one where you kind of basically do the whole thing. Am I right there, Janice?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And so it sounds like Rodney would send a great PDF file.
Yes.
And that is correct. Is if we get a PDF at the correct size with the pictures all beautifully in there, exactly the way they're supposed to be, it would work beautifully.
And in my case, for those familiar with Word, and I come from a life in the bank where I thought everybody knew Word, so I have a long experience with it, but you just set your margins left and right so that there's no bleeding, and you're away. You just make the table that size, and well, that's the size for the rest of your text for the whole book.
Yeah.
No, it's good that we all have different strategies, and I guess it all again depends on the format that we're working with you with this publication sort of process, Janice. Yeah. So Gail, thank you, Rodney. Gail, I think you've got your hand up there for a question.
I've just got two questions actually. One is, I thought, well, I better do this. I've just written a story for a book, 1,500 words. On Word, and I managed to put in the photos, but as I was putting in the photos, they kind of joined together in the middle because I couldn't space them across because I don't do Word. But I've sent that off to the person who's doing the book, and this is her 3rd book. So hopefully she can play with that to make that work. And I've also got to write some other stories as well. The other thing is family tree towards the back of the book. Do they normally come in Word? Or
Yeah,
how do you work that with lines, or do you just do
it does depend. If you are supplying us with final art, then it does get done in Word, and I have seen a lot of files come in Word. If we are doing the layout, we often would need to make sure, I mean, depending on how you want it to look, we want to use the same fonts and the same style in our layouts, and we generally draw it up. We use a software called InDesign, which is a Adobe Creative Suite. And so it's very, there's lots of options and you can do a lot in there, but family trees are very time consuming. So we're always looking for a better way of doing them. And I have heard, I haven't been able to find one yet, but I have heard that there are dedicated applications that you can do a family tree, and it will set up the lines and everything for us. We actually draw everything. We actually set it up and draw them. Generally.
Yes, okay. I think family trees are always the most complicated thing. Because I mean, it's not just the family tree, but it's how you present it, which parts of the tree you're presenting, how do you present lots of generations, and how does that easily fit onto pages. And I've seen several different ways of presenting family trees, and it really depends on what the main purpose of your family tree is for the reference for the book.
Oh,
Yeah, really interesting questions. Yes, Yvonne.
Just in light of that family tree, our next writers group, there's a free program that you can get that does a basic family tree, but I think it's just 3 generations. I haven't done it yet, but it certainly would be worth exploring a bit further. Once I find out how to use it, I'll let you know. And the other thing is, I've proofread a family history book, and I suggest that simple diagram family trees are put in each chapter. If you've got a chapter on each person, then you put in just a very simple family tree about where they fit in the family. Otherwise, people get confused about who's who. So just probably 3 generations is enough for each. Yeah.
I think that's really true. And also, you know, we all know that our families have particular names that are favourites. And so suddenly you've got, I mean, ours is favourite for ours is George Thomas Seymour. And there's about 7 of them. But not only are they different generations, but because various uncles have also had children they've called George Thomas Seymour, they're all coming along parallel lines.
This is where you've got to colour coordinate, possibly.
Yes, you do.
Colour coordinator. You get a designer to come in and put colours, and then you know which family is with which.
Or the other way is I put the birth date down.
Yes.
The birth year down in brackets usually, or maybe have to have the month as well if there's 2 children born within 12 months of each other with the same name.
And that can easily happen as well. Certainly that happens with our George Thomases. I just sometimes, you know, when you find another one and you just go, couldn't you have thought of something different? Right. Well, are there any other questions? Because I think they've been great questions. Gail, you've got another question there?
When you said about sending your document, you just said to send it like in a Word file.
Well, we do prefer a PDF,
A PDF.
which is easy enough to just save from your Word. Yeah.
And then the photos are just a JPEG resolution, or
Well, if you are supplying the final print ready file, you would put all the images into the Word document exactly the way where you want them, and you would then save it as a PDF, and that would be a final print ready PDF. But if you wanted us to do the layout, we would prefer to have the Word document separate, and then all the JPEGs in a separate folder, just referencing where they should go. So a small reference wherever they go within the manuscript.
So then if Mary ends up doing that and not, she could send that to you to get a quote for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Excellent. Yeah, good questions, Gail. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any yes, Yvonne.
I've got one more question I've typed in. Is what margin sizes do you suggest, and do you need to have a different size margins on the left and the right of the page? Because that would normally happen with the binding. It hasn't been brought up too much.
That is a good question, and it opens a lot of doors, because a lot of people have a different opinion on what it's supposed to be. I was always of the opinion that the center needed to be bigger than the outside. But a lot of people have the preference that the center should actually be smaller, because when you're looking at 2 pages next to each other, you've got an extra big gap in the middle. So it's interesting. A lot of people have a different preference to that. We have a tendency, and this is sort of something that we've a design that we've put together, and we have quite a big margin. It depends on, you know, how much you want to, you know, spend, but we put at least, probably, I'm going to look at this one and say at least it's at least a 18 to 20 mil margin. And if you've got as much as that, I would just center it. So I have a tendency to leave it 18 all around. But if you don't really have space for a big margin and you're only going for like a 10 mil margin around the outside, you would always put a little bit more on the inside. So
Yes.
say you had 10 on the outside, you'd put 15 on the inside, just so that, especially depending on how you're having it bound, that you'll be able to see on the inside.
Mm.
So you don't have to push it too far open.
Yes, I was
So-
asking that question partly for myself, but partly because I use Word quite a lot, and there is a way in Word that you can just do that. You can change your margin so you have a left and right margin for various pages and things. If you explore your Word program, you'll find that.
Yeah, it's definitely worthwhile having a minimum of 10 to 15, especially on the inside margin.
Right.
So that you don't, you're not reading into the spine. It's quite difficult when it's too close.
Thank you for that. Great question, Yvonne. Rodney.
Yeah, thanks, Janice. I just had the example here. This is the book that I have actually done, the one on refereeing basketball, and it's around about a 12mm spine.
Oh, yeah.
12mm spine. And the trick with it, this one's round about A5 size, but the trick, isn't it, that's what you're also trying to say, is that this side, where is my fingers? Inside this piece has got to be a bigger margin than the margin over this side, because to pull the book open and read it, if you have your same margin and it's you don't have enough margin on the inside, but it's the opposite way around on the next page. My fingers are going the wrong way. I think I'm doing this back to front. But can you see what I'm getting at? That the margin over here doesn't have to be as wide as the margin over here, because when you glue the middle of it and you try to pull the book open, you're going to wreck the book as it's read over and over.
Yeah, exactly. And so did you design that cover?
No, yes, basically I did.
Very nice.
Yes, most of
Very
that.
nice.
I did that for myself. Yeah.
Okay.
I had the format of what I wanted, and from recollection, I think the printer actually just dollied it up a little bit for me. But that was the general idea.
Oh, good. Yeah.
In
Very
basketball,
nice.
the hot spot is the keyhole where they shoot for goal, and it was called in the hot spot because the history of referees, we were always in the hot spot in a different context.
Oh, very nice. And so you've published 2 books.
This one, and then I haven't got a copy here, but an A4 size was the history of the Kilburney genealogy branch at the 20-year mark.
Oh, wow.
And that came out at about 88 pages of A4 size.
All right. Oh, yeah.
And actually the wonderful Sarah Hewitt designed our cover for that. What we did was, because Kilburney has got its view and you can get up in a certain spot in the southern suburbs and look over Kilburney to the Evans Bay area, and we had our picture that we use currently, what it's like, and Sarah spent about 2 hours driving her husband Barmy, driving up round the suburbs trying to find
trying to get a photograph.
And we found the original photo and took we had the original first of Kilburney about 80 or 100 years ago, and Sarah got a modern photo of the same picture. And so the thing was, when you opened it out like this, it was the whole thing was the big picture.
Oh, lovely. That's a good idea.
And then a small postcard size one of the old version, and they put the two together. That was quite inspired, I thought.
Lovely.
Definitely.
Thank you. Colleen, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I enjoyed that presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The resource that I just wanted to mention, I've come across a new people. I think they seem to have their own business, Family History Phonetics. I don't know if anyone's heard, but they do a lot of different stuff, and you let them know what kind of podcasts, what kind of things you're interested in, and they send you relevant material you can choose to watch. So I'd just like to read 4 points she's talking about writing, and yeah, just a couple of bits of it might be of some interest, and just how she's put it. So let me take 1 minute. At some point, you have to stop researching. That's right, and you have to stop researching and start writing your ancestors' stories. So there's a podcast about that. I promise if you do, you'll become a better genealogist. And I'm only recently new to writing stories about my family and such, and I found that to be true. You know, you because you have a focus, yeah, you tend to research more, and yeah, just have a purpose, energy to do it. The second one is writing is easy when you focus on writing one story at a time, as their podcast. The source of that story is your genealogy records. That's right. Discover how you can write one story from one document. Number 3 out of 4, after you've written your first draft based on sources, then it's essential to add historical context. That's their theory. So in this blog post, you can read how and why that's important. And the last one, number 4, are you discouraged, thinking no one will want to read your family history? Listen as I explain why you should write, if you think no one will want to read your stories. So I'm looking forward to exploring this and seeing if it's going to be helpful, and I will let you know how I found it on our writing and publishing.
Please do.
That would be great.
If you send the link to Claire, that would be fabulous. She can upload those to the Google platform. I think that the second point links really nicely back to our writing challenge. So where you can write a whole story about one family document. So get those writing hands going and thinking about how you could do that. We have got one more question, and then I think really we've got to the end of our time. I did promise Janice we weren't going to be up all night. So, so Gail, would you like to ask your question?
Just when you said about copies, you said 1 to 100. Is that your small print?
More or less. It is a difficult one because depending on if it's a very small book where it's only, 50 pages, then, 100 copies is quite a small run. But if it's a book that is this hefty, then, 100 copies is getting to a bigger run. But yes, as a general guide, anything up to about 200 or 300, a couple of hundred is a smallish run. And then going to the 500 to 1,000 is kind of going more into the larger run. But then again, the more you print, the unit cost comes down. So there's always that to consider. So
if you were to print like 50 and you wanted to donate those to a library, did the library just barcode it accordingly and put it into their library?
Yes. Yeah. So you would just apply for an ISBN and put the ISBN onto the book. And generally with the ISBN, you just have to give them 2 copies. But if you wanted to, donate all the copies or whatever,
Okay. Yep, cool. Thank you very much. Great. Really, Yes. If I can get onto the link, I'll be happy.
Thank you. Right. Well, I'll write to the official thank you now, Janice. What you have done in such a short length of time to give us such a comprehensive understanding of publishing, a very, very clear presentation with lots of hot tips for novices at publishing, but even for some people who have been doing a bit of publishing, there were some great opportunities in there to learn something new. I was just so impressed. I think I had written down 4 questions before we started, and I didn't get to ask them because you'd already answered them. So that was absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and for sharing such a valuable lot of information with us. I'm sure you're going to have people contacting you to ask more questions.
Oh, I hope so. Well, yes. Thank you for including me. It's been actually very interesting, and I hope to hear from some of you. It would be really good to. There's nothing more exciting than getting a new book in and talking to new authors. It's a lot of fun to really, because everybody is so excited. A lot of the time you're doing business prints and that sort of thing, and nobody really, it's something that you have to do. Whereas something like, writing a book and things, it's so personal, and people are just so excited about their, about their books. So yeah, it's
and
lovely.
I think you've shown us that it actually can be done. Just going through those steps and that process, we can publish a book if that's what we want to do.
This part at the end, the publishing, is the easy part for you.
Yeah, right. Rodney.
Very fast. Is Janice's business card coming up on the website at the end of this presentation, or is that kosher to go on our NZSG website? Just where the hell do we get Janice in future?
Good point.
Oh, yeah.
Like it. Yes, Janice. What I'll do is I'll ask if I can get your business card, and we'll distribute it if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I'm happy for you to do that. More than happy.
Just Janice made the invitation to get in touch, and then I'm thinking, well, yeah.
Well, the contact details, I think, on the presentation, or the contact details, if you do share that, are on for Printabooks. All the details are on the back on our website and on our email and that sort of thing. So they are on there. But yeah, I'm happy to.
I have one just quick comment. Rodney, earlier on, I think I heard you mention Johnsonville.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, is that where you live, Johnsonville?
It is, yes.
Well, that's my home suburb. Yeah. Cool. All right, thanks everyone. Yeah, I'm gonna go and yeah.
Right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. It's been really nice to have such a lovely big group tonight. I hope you're all going to look forward to getting the writing challenge in the post over the next few days. I'll be really excited to see people submitting pieces of writing about their family archive. And it's great to see you. We'll look forward to seeing you again next month. And I will be posting the details as soon as possible about what next month's meeting will be. And I'll be very excited to see people going onto the Google platform and having a look around there and leaving some messages and interacting on our Google platform as well. So thank you all for tonight, and we will look forward to seeing you all at our next meeting. Thank you, Janice.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.